Well, hey everybody, John Redlund here with another WCW themed show. Every WCW Starrcade tag team title match ranked from worst to best. Much like every other, WCW themed show that I've done previously and will do, throughout, the next few months. You'll see them pop up randomly because I am a little bit burned out on the current WWE product. And even though I watch New Japan and watch whatever else that I can, I figured I'd look back at some older stuff. So, I hope you guys do enjoy this. And there will be ones up for Great American Bash, Halloween Havoc, maybe Fall Brawl, we'll see, but probably Great American Bash, Halloween Havoc, because after that, I'm going to be going in the ones where there were like less than 10 pay-per-view events, and then those get kind of silly. So, here we go. There are some, tag team titles you might have forgotten existed in Jim Crockett Promotions, or in the early days of Ted Turner owning WCW. So, let's get into the 13 matches here with the Outsiders, Nash and Hall, versus the Faces of Fear at Starrcade 1996 for the tag team titles. This one, while not a bad match, is ranked the lowest because Nash and Hall were really, really cool heels, and I popped when they won the tag titles. The problem is they didn't have very interesting matches afterwards. Now, the Faces of Fear, Ming and the Barbarian, could, be really big hosses and were big hosses and could, quite frankly, destroy you if they wanted to. But it was, I don't want to say it was like oil and water. Just something didn't quite gel about this. They had some good chemistry, but just something didn't pop about this. Maybe it's because, this was in the midst of like the NWO interfering and everything, or just a whole bunch of fluky finishes and beating the WCW roster to powder, which did get a little bit tiring looking back in retrospect. Something about this didn't pop. Now, it wasn't a bad match. And I mean, for a match featuring basically two powerhouse tag teams, it was what it was, but it could have been better. So we get to Doom versus Arn Anderson and Barry Windham in a street fight that ended in a no contest at Starrcade 1990. Starrcade 1990 featured a lot of tag team matches, and it did feature, this for the tag team titles. And while it was good, the finish protected Doom and it protected Arn and Windham, and you could have just gone with another. You could have just gone with, a rematch like sometime down the road. I don't know. It was good for what it was, but it was never like of power guys. Like, I mean, even though Arn, while a strong guy, probably was most technically sound, Barry was he was agile, but he was starting to put on a little bit of weight here. He was starting to have some issues. And Doom, Butch Reed and Ron Simmons were a very good team, a very underappreciated team. However, stuff with this gelled, and then when it didn't gel, it was really goddamn bad. Like, it was a little bit better than the previous match, but still not that great. We then get to number 11, Sting and Dusty versus the Road Warriors for the NWA World Tag Titles at Starrcade 88. Paul Ellering basically interfered to help the Road Warriors, who were supposed to be heels, but maybe not heels because nobody wanted to boo the fucking Road Warriors. One of the few times that Dusty Rhodes maybe shouldn't have let his mind, go with something that he was so sure of. Because nothing wrong with, wanting to try new things, but turning the Road Warriors heel when nobody wanted to boo them wasn't the best idea. And then they did the spike in the eye angle and stuff like that, and that didn't work very good. Yeah, that wasn't all that great. But this was a good match. Crowd was hot. Crowd wanted to see Sting and Dusty win, and they almost won. And Ellering interfered, and that caused them to not win. Well, I mean, they won, but they won by DQ. And it was a way to keep the Road Warriors, hot and keep them as champions without making Dusty and Sting look weak. But yeah, again, nobody wanted to boo the fucking Road Warriors no matter how hard, anybody tried. No matter how hard the Bookers tried, no matter how hard anybody tried, no matter how hard the Road Warriors tried and Ellering tried to cut promos. To begin with, they had to be heels back when they first started. I totally got that. But by this point, a number of years later, they weren't going to be, no one could boo them. They just couldn't. Great match until, until that finish. But boy, I mean, the crowd actually was the best part of it. The crowd was really super hot. Number 10, the Russians, Crusher Khrushchev and Ivan Koloff versus the Kansas Jayhawks, Dutch Mantel and Bobby Jagger, whatever. Yeah, Jaggers, I think. Not too familiar with him. Nothing against the guy, just not familiar with him. Is for the U.S. tag titles from Starrcade 86. It's alright. Weird to see Dutch. Weird to see Dutch wrestling. I always forget that Dutch Mantel was actually a wrestler because I only knew him primarily as a manager. Like when he was Uncle Zebekiah or he's Dutch Mantel. And I know that he worked, I knew even as a kid that he obviously had worked as a wrestler, but I always forget that he actually was seen as a pretty good wrestler. And this is a decent match. It wasn't a great match. The Kansas Jayhawks were a decent team. The U.S. tag titles often get forgotten about for being pretty good, and they actually had some pretty good they had some pretty good champions, and had a pretty long run even into, I want to say, 92 in WCW, and then I think they were eventually just dropped. But it was a good match. In parts, it just wasn't great. And that much I'll say right there. Things are starting to get better. We then get Kevin Sullivan and Dr. Death Steve Williams versus the Fantastics for the U.S. tag titles at Starrcade 1988. Really good stuff, despite the fact Kevin Sullivan, who couldn't wrestle to save his goddamn life, was in this. Steve Williams, great talent. Fulton and Rogers, great talent. Fantastics were absolutely wonderful, whether in Japan, world class. I think they were in Mid-South. I mean, obviously they were in Jim Crockett Promotions and the early days of Turner owning WCW. But this was a good match. It was a good way to establish really hot tag team wrestling to not kick off the show. I think this did kick off the show. Forgive me if some of the lists and everything that I did are running together, but I remember this match being really, really good. Again, despite the fact Kevin Sullivan was involved. So yeah, I mean, I'm giving this a bit of a high mark. Oh, high mark. Good old room reference right there. Then we get to number 8, the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, Ole and Arn Anderson versus Wahoo McDaniel and Billy Jack Haynes for the NWA National Tag Team titles from Starrcade 80. I wrote down 85. I hope it's 85. Could have been 86. I have horrible handwriting. Wahoo at this point was not really going to wrestle all that much. I think he wrestled a couple more years, full time, and that was it, because he'd been wrestling for a while. Billy Jack was good. He wasn't great. But Ole and Arn could get a good match out of just about anybody, and that's what this was. And the Anderson brothers, even though they weren't brothers, even though you wouldn't have fucking known it, if we had not been told they weren't brothers, you would have fucking believed it, because they really did look alike. They look more alike than, Ole and Gene did, the Anderson brothers. Seriously, I swear to God, Ole and Arn were separated at birth, except Arn seems like he's a better guy than Ole. Who's really, really a salty motherfucker, but brutally honest. But anyway, it was a good match, despite the fact that Wahoo and Billy Jack were kind of just, I don't want to say a thrown together team, but they weren't a team I necessarily had an investment in. But it was good stuff for what it was. We then get to number 7. Arn and Tully versus the Road Warriors at Starrcade 1987 in Chicago, and they didn't put the titles on the Road Warriors. And yeah, the crowd was not very happy. Could you imagine why? Yeah, that wasn't really very good. And Starrcade 87, for it being in Chicago, if they had it closed-circuited, in the next building over or something like that, I'm not too familiar with the geography of where it was. I think it was the UIC Pavilion. I think that's where it was. But I'm not too familiar with the geography, but I would hope that they would get some kind of gross out of that. But I can see why the Chicago fans were pretty pissed off at Jim Crockett Promotions, because you built up everything with Arn, Tully, and the Road Warriors. If you had put another team in there and the Road Warriors had not lost, but Arn and Tully had beaten the third team, okay, would have totally gotten it. But the fact that they did the fluky DQ finish, I think it was one of them going over the top rope. I don't remember if it was Arn or Tully. But they did that, and so, they just killed the freaking crowd. Even though the crowd reacted to some stuff, it really did not set them off on the best path. And it wasn't Arn and Tully's fault. It wasn't Road Warriors' fault. It was strictly on the booking. It was strictly on whoever made the call. Not the best idea. Even though Arn and Tully had some legs left as champions, not putting the titles on the Road Warriors, kind of a big mistake. But a great match until that finish, and a really, really super hot crowd. I mean, my God, the floor was almost shaking from how loud they were. Number 6, the Insiders, which were Kevin Nash and DDP, not the Outsiders, the Insiders. Do you get it? Do you get it? How the fuck was WCW still around in 2000 with shit like this? And I love Nash and DDP, just the names of people. But versus the Perfect Event, Chuck Palumbo and Sean Stasiak. Again, it's Starrcade 2000. Good match. Really good match, actually. I don't know why the veterans won, but it was weird. It was very, very odd. Because titles were just being hot potatoed around a whole bunch at this point. Because the titles didn't mean anything, which was really sad. Stasiak and Palumbo probably should have won here. Because they were going to be the future. And had WCW survived, WCW would have survived maybe another couple of years, honestly. I don't think it would have lasted very long. Even if Bischoff's group had been able to buy it, I don't think they would have been able to last much longer than a couple of years, my personal opinion. But anyway, this match actually pretty good. Veterans and youth, a really good mix. Underappreciated match from later WCW when they didn't have a lot of good stuff. Now, things started to get a little bit better with a few of the angles, and the match quality was getting a little bit better because they had a little bit, more coherent booking. But then again, not having Russo involved would be anything, would be coherent booking by comparison. Good match though. Still wish the younger guys had won. Sting and Hawk versus the Nasty Boys from Starrcade 1993. It was a nearly 30-minute match, and it ended in a DQ. It was a great match. I just don't know why the fucking thing needed to last that long if you were going to do a DQ. Cut off 10 minutes and do a DQ. My opinion. Great match, though. Sting and Hawk, very unlikely team. I think they didn't they team up? Was it Sting and Hawk, or was it Sting and Road Warrior Animal versus Harlem Heat? I don't remember. That's Uncensored 96. Look, I'm trying to remember this stuff like off the top of my head, and I remember it being like a Chicago street fight, and it was really weird and messy. But Sting and Hawk were a good team. And obviously the Nasty Boys, who I never really cared for, could work with some people. They wrestled Public Enemy off and on for like about 18,000 years in late 90s, or in mid 90s WCW. It wasn't obviously 18,000 years, but it just seemed like any Nitro or any pay-per-views the Nasty Boys were on, they were facing Public Enemy or vice versa. It was weird. It was a good match. I just didn't think that this needed to go 30 minutes if you were going to do a DQ. I mean, for fuck's sake, if you don't want Sting or Hawk to lose, do like 19 minutes, do a DQ, and go from there. 29, you had to have a definitive winner at that point. And I know that they've done DQs and stuff like that on championship matches in the past, and even after this. But that left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth, which is really bad because it was a good match. Then we get number 4, Steamboat and Youngblood versus Jack and Jerry Brisco from Starrcade 83. Good match. Really good match. I believe Argentino Rocca was the referee. Argentino Rocca. Rocca. I'm just going to say Rocca. I always screw names up of people. I don't know why. I'm such a wrestling fan and I get so many names bouncing around in my head. It was a good match though. Enjoyable. Steamboat and Youngblood getting the victory. They had, and then they still had matches with the Briscoes afterwards. I think Jerry Brisco retired soon after, or not Jerry Brisco, but Jack Brisco retired soon after this. But it was a good match. I enjoyed this. Even if I can see why some people might call this overhyped, they did have a really good feel to it. The baby faces going over was the right way to go. Then we get to number 3, which is the Rock and Roll Express versus Ole and Arn Anderson for the NWA World Tag Team titles, and it was good. This was really good. If you get the Rock and Roll Express in any match, especially in the 80s, against the right team, they could just tear the house down. And they did. And the fucking fans loved them, especially the women. Not shocking. They just did. And yeah, Ricky and Robert, they just had the women on their feet. They had everybody loving them. Even though they were these, I don't want to say bland baby faces, but I would say they were generic baby faces, but they wrestled so goddamn well together. Their flashiness could win anybody over. And facing Ole and Arn, who were like just, dirty, nasty heels, they were, this was just a really, really good match. Not the best Rock and Roll Express match at Starrcade, because that was Rock and Roll Express, easy for me to say, versus Ivan and Nikita Koloff steel cage match for the NWA World titles at Starrcade, World Tag titles at Starrcade 1985. And this was great. The crowd reacting when Ricky and Robert won was absolutely wonderful. Great stuff. My goodness. How could you ask for anything more? No, you really fucking couldn't. It was just really, really goddamn good. Really loved it. Quite frankly, it's like, this is a match I may have to go and watch tomorrow. Not that you guys will know what day it is, but the whole point is I may have to watch this instead of, getting my get myself hyped up for anything in the current product. Because this was a really goddamn good match. But my favorite Starrcade match, or my favorite the Starrcade tag team match and tag team title match, Shane Douglas and Ricky Steamboat versus Barry Windham and Brian Pillman. For the NWA and WCW tag team titles, this is when I think WCW was trying to split off from the NWA and would soon after this. A number of months after this. But Starrcade 1992, I always hold up as one of the pinnacles of Starrcade. I fucking loved it. I thought, well, every match wasn't great, and I never liked the Lethal Lottery concept. This made the best use of it, and it was just really good. Every title match meant something. It had Vader versus Sting in the King of Cable finals, whatever the fuck that was. But Douglas, Steamboat, Pillman, and Windham, just fucking amazing tag team work. Really amazing tag team work. I can't say enough stuff about this. I can't encompass just how great it is. Watch it. Watch it. You'll appreciate it. And keep in mind, I've never been the biggest Shane Douglas fan. I got nothing against the guy. Got nothing against the guy. I never saw the biggest appeal, the big appeal with Shane like other people did. But by God, was he great here with Steamboat. And Windham and Pillman were a great team. This was just really picture-perfect stuff. But anyway, that's what I have to say. What do you have to say? Let me know in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin, and I will see you soon.